So I know that you, for your, was it your MA that you did the study of frogs?
Yeah, I studied the vocalizations of frogs in the Amazon in the Ecuadorian rainforest. So I did that for, you know, about 5 years roughly, just going back and forth to the Amazon and recording with a microphone. And then I also took an infrared camera, and that was kind of the end for me. I decided to become a filmmaker after that.
Is that what did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always took stills there too, so I just more and more just kept feeling like I'd started as an art major in college for 2 years, and then I just felt like, oh, how do I get back to that? Because I switched to biology because I wanted to learn about the natural world, and I figured college was a great time to do that. And then the whole time though, for years after that, I just kept on thinking, no, but I still want to do art. How do I do that? You know, how do I get back to that? How do I be creative? So
yeah, we'll definitely look at some of your more recent work, which is you looping back to that idea of being an artist, which you're using all your skills that you've picked up along the way, and now you're kind of looping back.
Yeah, it feels like that. I think my life constantly does something like that. Even when I started working for the BBC after I got my master's in film, and they had me go out and catch frogs. I was like, here I go again. I'm a recovering biologist. I never get over it. Yeah.
Well, I always like to start these things with a story because I think it's super fun and it kind of loosens everything up. So you said you might have a funny or an interesting story that you could tell us?
Yeah, I was working on as I said, a story about Yellowstone. It was a 3-part series for BBC, and it was kind of like my first really big thing I worked on, but I worked on it for 3 years. And at one point they had me filming beavers underwater, and so I had to put cameras underneath the water and figure out exactly where the beavers were going, and so I was doing that, and I had my waders on, and I was just like tossing around in the water, and it was the fall, and all of a sudden I saw this big moose really far away, and I was like, oh wow, that's a really beautiful moose, and then I just kept doing what I was doing. But they can be really dangerous. They're actually one of the more dangerous animals in Yellowstone.
Really?
Yeah, they can just tromp you. You know, they've got these big legs, you know, and I mean, really, they're mean.
Yeah.
And anyways, then 5 minutes later, look up again, and he's like 20 feet from me, just across the water. And I thought, well, it's kind of deep. But sure enough, he just starts just walking through that, and just like splashing, and he starts snorting.
Uh-oh.
And I think I'd been making all this sound. I think he maybe thought I was a female.
Okay.
Because he started grunting like a, you know, and it's so terrifying. And I was in my waders, and you know those dreams that you have where you can't go anywhere, you know, and I'm in the water, I'm like up to my thighs, and like trying to move quickly, and it's like slow motion, you know, like the camera that we're about to have. And then I ended up climbing on top of the beaver lodge just to get away from the thing so that I could climb over to the other side, and then, you know, I was in the water up to my chest with the chest waders nearly sinking, and I finally got out of there. But it was, oh yeah, that's what happened. When I was on the beaver lodge, I yelled off to a tourist who was like kind of far off. I was like, is the moose still there? Because I couldn't see through all the thick stuff. And he says, shh, there's a moose over there. Like I was ruining his experience. You know? God.
Oh my God, I love it.
Anyways, I survived.
That's a good way to go, though.
Yeah,
You know?
it would have been fine.
Yeah.
You know, I had a happy life until I got trampled, whatever
Not
the
boring,
word is.
you know?
I know.
Not in your sleep, so
No.
that's good.
Yeah, it's true.
The other things that Kathy does is she's a film artist for, is it what did you call it, a museum, Chip at Rise?
It's an art center.
An art
so,
center.
Yeah, it's a 10,000-acre art center right at the edge of the Beartooth Mountains outside of Yellowstone. And it's just really enormous. It has 9 large-scale land art sculptures. And then they also have classical music performances in the summertime, 3 days of, well, actually it's 3 performances over two days on the weekends. So they fly in people from all over the world, charge $10 a ticket. The tours around the property are free. It's like it's a really fun, amazing place, like really world-class. It blew me away when they asked me to work with them, because I thought, you know, in Montana, an art center doesn't usually get funded, first of all.
Yeah.
And then second of all, they'd have grizzly bear sculptures everywhere. But this isn't true, you know. They've got 2 Calder sculptures, and then 2 Mark de Souvreau sculptures, and some work by Stephen Tolaznik. Just really amazing sculptures out there.
Yeah.
And keep adding more.
Now, do you live in Montana?
I do. I live in Bozeman.
Okay.
So that's 2 hours away.
And how long have you lived there?
13 years now.
Okay. Must be an amazing place to live.
It is amazing. It's you know, a lot of wilderness. You know, you look out and you see 1 million acres of wilderness pretty fast, especially in Tippett Rise.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're also faculty at the School of Film and Photography at Montana State University.
Yeah.
So what kind of classes are you teaching there?
I teach cinematography, mostly production-based classes, so documentary, cinematography. I've taught science and natural history production, and then I've taught critical approaches to science film, things like that.
Okay.
And fiction filmmaking for seniors, and well, now I'm teaching an undergrad fiction filmmaking class as well, cinematography class.
Is it, do you find it to be a good fit for you to teach fiction filmmaking, or?
I'm not a fiction filmmaker, and I tell them that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think some of the poetic documentaries border on fiction, but I think it's fine because in a way, I think as a documentary filmmaker, you prepare yourself for the unknown, and it's not easier by any means in fiction because you're dealing with more people a lot of times, and so that just creates an additional layer of chaos, you know. But the chaos in documentary, I think, prepares you really well for fiction because you get to plan things in fiction as much as you want, you know.
Yeah, and you can do it again.
Again and again, yeah.
Yeah.
With time restraints, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's always time.
Yes. Time is money.
And you're also the founding director for the Center for the Communication of Science, which sounds amazing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I did just give that up because I have too much going on. But
Yeah.
yes, it was a center devoted to fusing the arts and sciences. So still definitely is operating, but not with me. So yeah, it's a center that I started about 3 years ago, ran it through the Board of Regents, and really hopefully helps to promote science and art coming together, because I really think neither one can be without the other.
Well, that's an interesting statement. Why? I mean, I would think just on the face of it that art and science seem very different. So why do you think that they can help each other?
Well, I think science needs art in a way that sometimes it's not appreciated. You know, I think you know, science is really it's a measuring. You know, I think what the Greeks used to say, they were astronomy and music were two sides of the same coin, right? So astronomy, you measure things, everything's very precise, but then music is everything you can't measure, everything you feel. You know, and so I think that connection is really, really important. And, you know, the art is what will probably save humanity, and science, you know, to some degree will as well. But I actually believe more strongly that art will be the thing that allows us to recognize our own humanity.
I think that's a theme. I feel like that's something that we've been talking about all festival here with the films that we've been watching and stuff, and you know, the film last night, and I don't know, was anybody here for the film last night? No? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I think that resonates with that idea. Wow, that's a lot. It's really interesting. So can you tell me more about how you got interested in filmmaking?
Yes, so when I was in Ecuador, you know, I was already recording all these vocalizations of these frogs, and I knew a lot of documentary filmmakers because I lived in Austin, Texas, and so yeah, I guess I just started watching lots of films there, and I would see the classics, you know, and then I would go back and watch documentaries with my friends, and then I guess that was really it. I think it was the influence of the people that I was around, and then also just always was really driven by motion. You know, I really loved the way light plays with motion, and that's cinematography. So that was good for me to keep going down that path. And whenever I was painting, you know, I always wanted to paint things that were moving, you know, to make them look like they're actually moving, which is very hard to do when you're, you know, doing a still image.
It's so funny that you say that, because I was watching all your stuff and I was like, every image has some sort of motion in it, whether you're moving the camera or something in the frame is moving, or the light is moving, and it's just so, you know, it's so beautifully done, and it's so consistent, the movement, that feeling of the movement is so consistent through the piece. I was going to say to you guys, like, when we watch these clips, really watch that motion movement idea that she's doing. You should totally steal it for your toolkit.
Yes, you should.
You should, because it really adds something really beautiful, lyrical to the images that we don't always think of.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And so I think that I was watching that and I was thinking, God, you know, they say in fiction filmmaking, working with kids is really hard, but working with wild animals must be like just the most humbling experience of trying to get those on film.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, certainly. I mean, yeah, that bison actually, that was another story. I nearly died by bison death. No. Actually, I mean, it was a little less close, but, you know, we got that shot with the bison standing there, and then he started grunting, it's a common theme, and then we got back in the water as quickly as we could because he started pawing the ground, you know, right next to us, and so we're like, shit. So we floated on by.
They're letting you know. At least they're letting you know.
Yeah, and then, and then he walked right where we'd been. So, you know, that happened, but yeah, I think the fish were easier probably than the bison, but I scuba dove in that river.
Wow.
And so I, you know, had to dive in. It was like really fast current, so I had to weight myself down so much that I wouldn't move. So it was like 50 pounds or something, and I sunk.
Wow.
And I was there just on the bottom. It was a really amazing experience though, just to be on the bottom of a river like that with the current flowing so fast over you. And to feel like, no, I'm not going to move. Actually, I'm really not. You know, like you have to convince yourself that. And then when you don't, you know, you can just really appreciate that and see things differently, which I think is what the camera lets you do, right? You know, once you can drop in, you have that moment where you're kind of nervous and everything's happening really fast, and then if you can stop, and it's almost like a meditation in a way, you know, because it's hard to meditate when you're shooting because everything's chaotic, but if you can get there, then all of a sudden I think more things reveal themselves to you, that you can see things in a different light, and you can see, maybe you see more beautiful things, or you see things that aren't as beautiful maybe that need to be filmed, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. I feel like there's that moment that I think as shooters we all get to. It's like, aha, this is it. You know, and I felt like that under the water.
Well, it's addictive when you get there, for sure.
It is. It is addictive, yeah.
I like that. I mean, the one thing that really struck me about your work is that this idea of really slowing down, and every moment is really intentional, and I feel that I feel your kind of voice through your work of saying, look at this, now look at this, right? And I feel like sometimes documentary has kind of this reputation of being chaotic and not as intentional. And can you talk more about that idea, and also just the way that you kind of turned from documentary more into this, you're calling it more artistic work or poetic work?
Yeah, I think it's like poetic documentary, really. I mean, I do think it borders on fiction sometimes, but like we were talking about yesterday, maybe it's just about when you don't really know what's going to happen. When you enter into the unknown, I think then you're in documentary. And I feel like my work still is in the unknown. So that's, but yeah, I think the intentionality of it, maybe I'm just like, I like control. No.
It's possible.
No, I know. No, that's what my colleague Mickey, who I work with, he teases me about that. But I'm not really a control freak, but you know, I do like to be able to control some situations.
Yeah.
And maybe documentary. I mean, I'm also very willing to just go out there and just shoot whatever might happen. You know, I've done that before, and I still do. I mean, I guess all the wildlife stuff, all the things that I do outside. Yeah. You know, it's like you never know what the weather's going to do or what's going to happen out there. You know.
But that's the fun of it.
Exactly.
Right?
I know there's really a lot of beauty in the unknown, a lot.
And I think it's also really interesting that you started doing sound with the frogs, because the sound in that is so amazing. And is that, can you talk more about your decisions in that piece about sound?
Yeah, I was really into, at the time, and I still am, but creating sound designs that were more musical, but just with natural sound. And so I used, I kind of layered different types of wind, and then the interview sound was just me out there with the, you know, like a usual interview. But yeah, I feel like wind can really have its own music, so I worked hard on that part. But I think that when you get good sound, you know, it's more tactile, and so like those close-up shots too, I feel like are try to get into some sort of synesthesia. You know, I mean, I don't know if I ever really accomplished that, but I like the idea of it. I think that you can. I was reading a lot about Laura Marks. You know, she's a film theorist, but she thinks a lot about haptic visuality, and that's really just about, you know, the ability to touch and to be able to see and to make you feel like you can touch something. And a lot of that relies on close-ups, and I think sometimes that also relies on close-ups in slow motion. And then maybe through that you can transcend cultures. And so that's something that I've been really interested in, is how do you reach across different cultures without using words, you know, but just using imagery. And yeah, so I've been working hard on that idea, and that maybe I started with this one. I'm just trying to, I mean, that piece to me, I was trying to kind of show how really nature is within all of us, right? And the hardship of one culture can be felt across all cultures. And, you know, I don't know if it gets there in 2 minutes, but that's really the idea in that piece. You know, the wind comes through us all.
Wow, yeah. And it's funny because wind is something you can't see.
Yeah.
You can only see the effect of it.
Right.
And so as a cinematographer, that's a challenge, right? Because like, what do I show?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to find things. I happen to have lived in a very windy place at the time. Livingston gets like 70-mile-an-hour winds, and
wow.
Yeah, it's really insane. You know, it's like the average wind speed is like 40 miles an hour, 230 days a year, something like that.
Couldn't live there.
Yeah,
wind drives me a little nuts.
It's a bit much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Here is better. I think it's like 20 miles an hour or something a year. I was looking up. It's not so bad. Livingston, it's 30 minutes from Bozeman. I lived there 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, you literally can't walk around sometimes because you get blown over. Small children fall over.
I guess that happens here too. It's just the windy city, I guess. But yeah, okay. Yeah. Wow, okay. Can you talk more about maybe your collaboration with, you know, the other artists that you're collaborating with, and what that's like and what that's brought to your work?
Yeah, so I've worked with Julian Brokaw, who's a pianist. Now I've worked on 4 films with him in the last year, and they're all short films. And yeah, it's been a really wonderful collaboration. He's an excellent pianist, and he's a composer as well. So he composed one piece of music for a film called The Stainless Stealer Steals the Universe, which we'll show you. But then most recently in June, he played Maurice Ravel's work and Mompau, 2 composers from the early 1900s. They're kind of impressionists. One's a Spanish impressionist, the other's a French impressionist. And so he came and we recorded with him. And yeah, to be able to work with somebody who has such power over his instrument, really. I mean, he's able to, the touch that he plays on the piano is just incredible to me. And so, you know, it's also it's aesthetic taste, right? So I really appreciate it, and I really enjoy that. And so it's been such a treat to be working with him.
I mean, the piece that you guys did together, I mean, did you guys talk about the images that you were gonna film, and, you know,
yes.
How did that?
We did. So for the Time film, it's called Unconquered Time, he and I talked for a long time about what we do. He said, oh, I'm going to be coming to Tippett Rise. I'm going to record Maurice Ravel's work called Miroir, and it's mirrors. He said, you know, what do you think about doing a film with mirrors? And I said, that sounds fantastic, you know. And I was really I am into projecting, right? Okay. So I was like, yeah, we'll project onto the mirrors. We'll project footage, you know. And it was like, okay, what are we going to do? And it was like, he says, well, you know, the piece I'm going to play, it's all about bells. And we happened to be in Paris at the time. We were walking right by Notre Dame Cathedral. And he's like, this is where Ravel thought of this piece, you know. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know. It's like, and well, bells, it's all about time, you know. That's all that is. And he says, oh yeah, the other piece I'm doing too is all bells as well. So it's like, okay, well, we're going to make a film about time. And then I started talking to the Halsteads, who I work for, and they said, oh my gosh, have you heard this poem? It's by W.H. Auden. It's As I Walked Out One Evening. And the poem is about, it's about time, but it's about love in the face of time, right? And the fate of love, the fate of life in general in the face of time. And so the initial thought was, okay, yeah, let's use this poem and make the film around that poem. But in the end, I think, you know, I have a hard time with words sometimes, and I think that to put the words into the film, I'm trying not to do that right now. I think it's good that it's based on that poem. It's completely based on that poem. In fact, I edited it at first using the poem all the way through, and then I took it out, and so it remains out.
Why do you have trouble with words?
You know, I like to tell the visual story so much more that I think sometimes when you immediately move into the words, it takes you into a different part of your brain, you know, and it puts you into sort of more of a literal frame of mind. And while sometimes that's perfectly fine, for a poetic film that's really using music and visuals, it almost interrupts it. You know, each time you hear it, then you're jarred back into thinking about what that word really is. And I think especially in this poem, you know, there are specific things like, as I walked out one evening, walking down Bristol Street. You know, well, I don't have Bristol Street. You know, I'm not in Birmingham. So, and I didn't really want to go film in Birmingham on Bristol Street. And, you know, so all those things, it's like, it just interrupts the whole flow of the piece when the piece is really about the fate of love. So it's like that.
Can you talk about the process of how you filmed that?
I can. I have pictures, actually. So let's see. This is the barn space. And this is actually, you know, we had to turn this into a black space. So this is what we did. You can see the piano here. We bought black carpet from Lowe's. And then we had, you can see maybe up here at the very top is a 12 by frame with quarter grid diffusion. And then from that we skirted it with duvetine.
Who's helping you with this?
So I'll show you. It was Andrew T. He's a gaffer. And then we had a guy named Bob. And so both of them were helpful. But that on the right is Andrew. And he usually works on commercials. And so he comes out to help us sometimes. And
he must love it.
Yeah, it's really fun because I tell him, you know, like, okay, I'm going to film these planets on this sculpture for 2 hours. You know, he's like, all right, I'm going to go listen to the game. You know, like, he loves it. You know, he's like, it's very a different pace. You know, definitely. I try to make sure that we slow down, but he's really awesome, and he brings in all this stuff, and it just took 2 of them. I mean, we were all helping, but
yeah.
So we had in that, so you can see there's the diffusion. We had 4 1K lights up top above that. And, you know, of course, we shut all the blinds to the place, so that was when we had things open still, so you could still see the barn. But we mostly used just 2 1Ks above that. And it was in part because of the projection. We kind of needed to have a lower light situation for the projection. So here is, you know, we also had to hide because there are mirrors, you know, and so to get those front-on shots, you had to kind of like, the entire thing had to be enclosed so that we weren't in the shot. But when you're on the side, it was easier.
Yeah.
But so you can see this is Julian, that's me. We had 2 cameras on most of the things that we were doing. Here's the projection. That's Bob on the left and Andrew on the right, and then Colleen, who was shooting as well. And
what do you use in there for projection? Like just a video projector?
Just a regular video projector, 1080. Yeah. I forget what, maybe a Panasonic or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, it had a pretty good throw. I forget what brightness it was, how many lumens, but
yeah,
maybe maybe 15,000. But anyway, so you can see the projection shows up there even in the light. But
And those are on mirrors?
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we actually had to paint the mirrors a little bit because,
Yeah.
you know, so I did this other film, which I can show you, but it was using a stainless steel sculpture.
Yeah.
And we projected into that, and everything did it perfectly. But
Right.
for mirrors, they don't really project as well. They don't bounce that image as easily. So we
Yeah.
had to spray it with some, like, it was actually like a hair dye. And so it was just like some kind of gray hair dye. And it's just really like light, you know, something that they'd had in the back of their truck actually. They're like, I know, let's try this. It's like, yeah, let's try that. And then at first I was just spinning the mirrors too, just like, yeah, let's set them all in motion and just spin them and see what happens. And then it was too chaotic, so we ended up wiring them all together. And then I had, let's see, oh, this is our piano tuner. This is Mike Toya. He actually, in the concert time in the summer, he tunes the pianos like 3 times a day.
Wow.
Because they fall out of tune to his ears. Like, wow. And you know, if it gets any sunlight on it, it's like, he freaks out. He's like, oh my God, it's terrible. You know, all my hard work is gone. So we have to keep all the doors closed and you know, I'm like, Mike, I got to get exposure now. He's like, okay. And he'll pace until I close the door, you know, for the window. Anyway, but he's really wonderful. He lives in Hawaii normally, and they fly him out, and, you know, he's on site whenever somebody's recording. He's always there tuning the piano.
Wow.
So he was doing that right before Julian was going to play.
Wow.
So this is Sarah. She's the mirror puppeteer, and so she's laying on the ground because she. What we ended up doing was, you know, attaching all these mirrors with wires to the back, but loosely, so that they could still move around, but just gently. And then she had strings, and so she had one on her foot and her hand, and then, you know, I don't know how she did. She maybe did 2 with the hand, and anyway, so we would just be like, okay, move mirror 1 and 2, and then she would do that. Pretty amazing. Yeah. So that's that.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Okay. And then can we talk about the Calder piece? Did you want to show that, or did you
Yeah.
want to talk about the interview? Yeah.
We could do the Calder piece and then
Yeah.
talk about interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Calder piece, this is the Calder. Kathy Halstead, who's one of the founders, came to me and said, hey, Kathy, you know, I was making all these art films, like poetic films, mostly on the landscape. And she said, you know, nobody seems to know that we have a Calder in our barn. And it's, you know, it's like, I forget how much it is, but it's really expensive. I think I keep putting it out of my mind because I, you know,
Crazy money.
had to work with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The accountant actually looked it up while he was watching the film one day. He's like, wait a minute, oh my God. He's like, did you touch it?
Maybe.
Yeah. And so, you know, I was like, oh gosh, how am I gonna make a film about that? You know, how do you make a film about that? You know, it was like, it's in a corner, because otherwise it would be in front of our projector when we show films. And so it's kind of like, it's back here on the left.
Oh.
And so that's a quartet playing. I think that's the Ariel String Quartet. Anyway, so so I thought, all right, we can't move it, because if you move it, you got to get the Hirshhorn to come and move it, because it's on loan from the Hirshhorn.
Oh, you mean
Museum.
like move it outside?
Well, I was hoping to move it kind of in the middle, right?
Oh.
You know, so you could do something more easily. But that would have required a whole band of 15 people from the Hirshhorn to come out and, you know, help you.
Oh, really?
So that wouldn't have worked. Yeah.
Okay. So can you talk more about the process of making it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, those projections were all NASA footage, of course. And I have a friend who works at NASA, and I'd gone the June before. We shot this in October last year. And I had been there a few months before, and he'd shown me the solar flares, you know, and it was just amazing. I was like, wow, this should be its own art piece, you know, just watching the sun spewing like that. And so it was just really, that image stuck with me. And then when Kathy Halstead asked me to make this film, I started doing a lot of research into Calder. And I was like, you know, I was reading books and books about him, and it turns out he was just completely fascinated with the universe. And he'd actually been an engineer even before he was an artist. And he,
that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so until he was about like late 20s, he was an engineer. And then he became an artist like his parents were. He moved to Paris, and hung out with all the artists you would have expected, you know, Mondrian, you know, everybody that you would ever think of. And so he started getting kind of more abstract. He first started making these little animal models, you know, in like circuses. And then he started making mobiles, you know, especially after talking to Mondrian more. And his work just became more and more abstract. But everything was always sort of orbiting. And it was around the 1930s they discovered Pluto was a planet, which of course we know it's not now. But we still, you know, I still harbor some resentment about that.
Poor Pluto.
You know,
I know.
I mean, anyway, we can get over that later. But so anyway, Pluto was a planet then, and he was just amazed by that, right? So he started thinking about his mobiles really as orbiting objects, and really was constantly thinking of the planets and the universe and our place in the universe. And for me, I think that image of, you know, what the astronauts saw from the moon, looking at the Earth rise, right? That, to me, is everything that I think we should be thinking about right now. You know, like there's like literally nothing else we should be thinking of except for, look at us in this little planet. You know, we're all together, we're all connected, and you know, what more do you need to say after that? It's like, why are we fighting with each other? Why do we have problems like we have? Why can't we just figure this out, you know? And so that was really important to me, still is, but especially when I made the film and thinking about the fact that Calder, you know, kind of wanted to steal the universe in a way. So I called it The Stainless Stealer Steals the Universe.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
All right, we're running a little short on time because I want to get to some Q&A because I know people really want to ask you stuff, but I know you wanted to cover one more thing, which was the interview.
Yeah.
Can I take an extra 5 minutes and just do this one last thing, I'm hoping?
That's fine,
which is the interview with the pianist.
Yeah, okay, so this is Julian.
So I think you wanted to talk about the interview process there?
Yeah, so with Julian in that piece, you know, I think it was really important. It was really important at first just to have the time with him, to talk to him, and I think with that we were able to kind of have a nice conversation. And actually, that whole interview, I think I cut maybe 5 times in that 15-minute film.
Wow.
Which I think is unusual, you know, because you often have to, you know, take bits here, you know, 30 seconds here. But actually, as the whole film goes on, I started feeling like I needed his whole train of thought.
Yeah.
Because it was so interesting. You know, he talks about how, you know, he believes that art is basically resisting, but not by fighting. You know, you make this creative work and you can change the world, right? But you do it gently. And so anyway, he had the most beautiful things that he said. So I couldn't cut anything out, and which was really fun. But I think that it was about being comfortable, and about being comfortable with the camera, and then also kicking everybody else out of the room. You know? So that one, I did have Andrew there still because we had just made the Stainless Stealer piece the day before. And so he was lighting it, and then we had an assistant. I made him leave, and then it was just Mickey and I in the room. So I was shooting, and Mickey was asking questions, but then I would ask the questions as well, you know, and he would talk to Mickey. And the three of us just had such a great rapport that I think that's how he was able to open up about his experience in life, and he really goes in pretty deep. But this was our general setup. You can see we had an M18 Airy light, this was actually a book light. I don't know if you can tell. There's Billy. He's trying to shrink the size of Caroline. This is Caroline. She comes in later, and so you can see there's diffusion set up right here. Can you see the mouse?
Yeah.
And then so this light is actually bouncing off this board, this white board here, and it's a foam core board, and then it bounces through the diffusion. And they call it a book light because it's kind of like this angle. And then she would have been sitting here on this piano bench. And then this black stuff is really to control the spill that happens. And then this is a sound blanket. And Mickey, who I work with, is incredible with sound.
Oh. He's
won a Grammy and everything. I mean, he's really, really good, and he uses the best microphones. And I think that was the other thing about that piece for me.
I know, he sounds so present.
Sounds so present. You're right there. You know, you feel like you're like on his heart almost. You know, and yeah. So that was. Oh, and then we also had a net on the window as well, just because we were breaking my usual rule of not shooting into window. But when you have, we had a 2K outside light, shining in as backlight. Yeah. And then we had this net as well. So it was really, what a great, ability to be able to shoot into the window. But you have to have those tools if you're going to do that.
Yeah, don't shoot into the window.
Yeah.
Unless
you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was it. But this is Caroline. That's the shot we ended up with. But I think that's really what I guess I want people to get out of it, is just this idea that you should, if you do an interview, which I know sometimes we don't even really like interview. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they are important. Sometimes you do want to hear what somebody really has to say. But to really get what they have to say, you have to dive in with them. You can't just ask them a bunch of questions, have a piece of paper, and go from all the way down. You really have to have a conversation.
Yes. Well, speaking of conversations, I'd love to hear from you guys. So I know that we have a little bit of time for some Q&A, and there's a microphone over here. So does anybody? Because we'll keep talking, believe me. But do you guys have comments, questions? I'm sure you must.
Hello.
Hi.
It's a little close. Well, I was curious, with your background in biology, other than the content that you shoot, do you feel that it has influenced, your methodology at all?
Of how I shoot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, I think as a biologist, you kind of become a little bit of a naturalist. I don't think all biologists are naturalists, but as a field biologist, you do. And so I think it forces you to pay attention to things in a different way. Like you hear a sound, you turn your head, you see what that is, what's crawling around on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think it's made me probably more aware of certain things in the natural world, and to pay attention to those, and to, like have a search image for something if I want to film it, So yeah, I definitely think I think that experience for me was really life-changing. I went down there when I was 21, I guess, as an undergrad. I knocked on a professor's door and said, "Hey, I'm going to Ecuador and I want to be a field biologist," literally. And he's like, "Take this microphone, whatever, kid," And I did, and then I just went everywhere recording frogs, of all things. But I got to meet all kinds of really interesting people along the way. And I think, with that, I also was doing everything at night. And so at night in the rainforest, everything is, for a 21-year-old that had never been to the rainforest, it was certainly frightening sometimes, but then it was just amazing as well. And I think it really made me aware of how, when you do have the darkness, everything is alive. You hear everything. It's like, I don't know if you've ever, I kayaked at night a few times, and it sounds like Death Kitty Falls everywhere when you do that, because it's like, oh my God, we're going over another waterfall, but it's like a little ripple, that's just, and so I think the nighttime is another thing that really changed me. Yeah, through biology.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi there. So first off, thank you for showing all of those beautiful clips. I think you definitely succeeded in trying to transcend cultures and just kind of visualize life itself. It was very, very humbling and beautiful, so thank you for showing those to us today. So my question is, of those clips, I noticed a lot of focus on water, and I just was wondering your process of pointing that, or filming that, because I imagine it's more than just, pointing the camera at the water, because to me, that was the most breathtaking part of your film, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, my process with water. Not sure really where to start with that. I mean, I think I've always been I've had an affinity to water my whole life, I think. My mom put me on the swim team when I was like 4 or something ridiculous. You know, like I was like practically drowning. But it was. But I think when I go out there and I shoot water, yeah, that's really easy for me. You know, because I love it so much. It's like it could be a creek, it could be a little puddle. You know, it doesn't really have to be anything. It's just like I could film raindrops forever. And and maybe that's the thing, is just to find your element that just fascinates you like that, you know. I mean, everybody probably has something that is like that for them, but definitely, yeah, water is that for me. So I think, I don't know, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Yeah.
So I liked what you were saying about language. That kind of struck a chord with me, because I find that for me, language is often very clumsy. And so for you personally in your work, how do you kind of strike a balance between anchoring an image and simply allowing an audience to read into the subtext?
That's a really good question. I think, gosh, sometimes I wonder if images are anchored at all, you know, and maybe they shouldn't be really anchored, you know, because maybe when you do that, then you hold them back. But you do have to have some way to focus yourself, you know. And for me, I think it takes a lot of edits, you know. I mean, the version you saw, I was like, there's still out of sync hands in there, you know. So like, I'm probably got another 4 more edits that I'm going to do on that. And I think it's about watching it and being patient with it and seeing, where is this taking me in my mind, you know. And because that's all it is like synapses, right? So it's like you're going from one to the next, and that's what language does for you, right? It takes you down certain synapses, and so it's all you're doing, just without words, I guess. So in a way, maybe it's anchoring everything, but maybe connecting it more than anchoring it. Yeah. Does that help?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks.